My name, for those of you who I haven't met, my name is Verona Thibault. I manage the Saskatchewan Economic Development Alliance here in Saskatchewan, based in Saskatoon. We've operated for over 35 years. We support the social and economic health of communities throughout the province through providing resources, programs, consulting, education, and networking. As an alliance, we aim to provide a space where all sectors can come together, and that's very appropriate today with the speakers that are joining us. Thanks to all our members and partners who are with us today. SEDA self-generates 100% of our revenue, and so your membership support is really essential to our continued ability to offer programs and services across the province. I encourage attendees who may not be a member, a future member, to visit our website, look at our resources and services, and consider investing in a membership with us. So housekeeping items, please again ensure your audio is muted and video is off. We have quite a few people on the call today, many from outside the province, across the country in North America. If you have a question during any of the presentations, please use the chat function. We notice it has been a bit quirky, so if you have trouble accessing chat, please text my cell phone at 1-306-381-3900. If the opportunity arises, I'll segue in questions between our presenters today, and I can also raise them at the end of our session. We are recording the webinar, and it will be posted on our webinar page. We ask for 3 business days grace in order for us to get that online for you. For those of you who may not be aware, this week is Economic Development Week across Canada and the United States. And so we're really excited to have the focus of our webinar on public spaces and placemaking, because economic development is inclusive. It encompasses all sectors of community. So it's appropriate and exciting that we're focused on this particular area today. I'm grateful to our 3 presenters, Lenore Switson with Prairie Wild Consulting, who will present first, followed by Judith Verisic with the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District, and lastly, Todd Schaefer, CEO of Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association. So it's my pleasure to introduce Lenore. I'm going to ask her to take the lead today. Lenore is a registered professional planner and founding director and principal partner of Prairie Wild Consulting, whose mission is to prepare communities for the future. Lenore is a graduate from the University of Saskatchewan and a professional associate with the U of S Regional and Urban Planning Program, Geography and Planning Department. Lenore, thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today's webinar. It's an honor to be there. So welcome, everybody. So my first slide, of course, is an image I think that we've all seen and have come to become very familiar with, called coronavirus. I'm just showing some slides. I'm from Saskatchewan, so this will be somewhat Saskatchewan focused, though I go to North America and beyond. You know, pre-COVID was pretty much pre-COVID. We all, I think, will now have a marker in time for what that is. Hockey games, the beach at Waskesiu I've got showing there, people working at their offices. For those that know Saskatoon Drift Cafe, Brian up in the balcony looking down at his patrons, folks looking forward to the Fringe Festival and hanging out on the streets of Saskatoon. And then this happens. 2020, Corona what? At the start of it, I think people were wondering, is this about a beer or is this a real thing? And then we started to question, is it the event of our generation? And then it starts. We all get familiar with Justin Trudeau at his front door. And pretty closely afterwards, as close as March 18th, and for folks across Canada, you'll recall that we had in Saskatoon, we were hosting our Canadian version of the Music Grammys at our biggest facility that we have, that also hosts a lacrosse team that gets over 15,000 people in it. So all of a sudden on March 18th, we have our Prime Minister announcing, here's what we're going to be able to do. We're here, we're with you, and here's the programs that we're going to be. And they started to lay them out pretty darn quickly, and they morphed and changed daily as we go. After that, we started to get a lot of folks that were starting to say, we got to do something about this. What are we going to do? So again, using a little bit of Saskatchewan and Canadian context here, we had university students that started to form caremongering and delivery of foods out. The library in Regina started to put together data to help with what's being number crunched for across looking for a vaccine, and the library as well, looking at a Twitter thread on hand washing. We had local hotels that were looking at accommodating rooms for frontline health workers. Folks in Charlottetown that were outreaching to people, and all across Canada, working on social projects, how to get businesses up and alive, everything from pizza to otherwise. And we're hearing that pizza sales are way up all across North America and elsewhere. We don't have to go far back to know that pandemics wasn't a matter of if, it was when. The slides I got up there of the one that we know probably most commonly of on the left-hand side, the Spanish influenza. And I mean, in the case of the Spanish influenza, 1917, 18, you know, in conjunction with World War I, the estimates between 60 and 1 million people, 100 million people passed away through that. But we go back to the start of where my profession kind of has its roots, was actually in public health. Cholera outbreaks in the 1850s in London. That's the top right-hand slide. You know, so sanitation, public health, this has been something that has been part of the planning platform, and also part of anybody who's involved with anything in the public domain, and also cross-sectioning with our civil society. The picture on the bottom is, of course, of where the outbreak came in China, at a wet market, if they so determined. Though there's, of course, the parallel stories, the mythologies, and all of the other kinds of stories that have come out. But if we look at it, the pandemic is when we start to get some sort of contamination, something that transfers from animal to human, and here we are. So again, it wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. We've known that pandemics are something that we've lived with. We've had other pandemics in between, H1N1, MERS, all of the other ones that have been out there that we're still living with to some degree. But here we are with one that has taken over our entire world. With, as of at the end of April, over half the world was still in a lockdown and just starting to come out. Just trying to move my slide here. So where are we now? I've got more questions than I've got answers as a planner, I'll tell you. And as somebody who's just a community resident and who today is feeling somewhat overwhelmed at some times, and amazed and compelled to see what the future can bring us. Where's Waldo, the social distancing version? Pretty easy to find on that screen. To my cleanup for today's call with a Zoom call and other means, such as the one that we're using today. We know the stats, they're there. It's probably all marked on your thing. Somebody looking at something over this. So you can see, I mean, Canada's ranking them in the top 12, hovering around there, both in terms of cases and deaths. But there's also something else that's happening, and it's the groan zone that a lot of us are feeling. Oh, we're into week 7, week 8 of this. You know, what's going to happen? All the questions that come with this. And that's happening in our leadership at the local level, at the provincial level, at the federal level, and internationally. So if we look to our premier in Saskatchewan, he was one of the first out of the gates in the end of April to say, we've got to start thinking about how to reopen. Pandemic or no pandemic, what can we do, knowing that this is a health crisis, knowing that this is a pandemic, but also knowing that life has to move on. And so there was a reopening announcement in 5 phases, which actually started on May 4th. And at the same time as this is going on, the numbers that are going on in Saskatchewan in terms of incidents and cases is still there. And predominantly in the northern part of our province, which is obviously, but it's largely populated by Indigenous peoples. And in those communities, we are seeing an increase, both in COVID incidents and also in a couple of passings away of people within communities. So we've got a province that on the one hand is opening up. There is a lockdown going on as we speak in our province in the north. This is something that we know that was announced right at the beginning of this, that this would become regionalized across the world, that we would go into isolation to start, we would lock down, we would try to flatten the curve, not meaning that we were going to solve this, but that we would just try to make it easily enough for people to access the medical systems for this that was in crisis. And while we were doing that, at the same time, we're trying to plan for how to figure out how to get out of this. So it's not surprising, and it was told to us from the World Health Organization, from every leader within the medical field to say this would happen. And here we are in the midst of it. Vaccines are being developed. Our own adopted city of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan is one of the facilities around the world that is part of a team mechanism for saying that we need to be looking at a vaccine. And you'll see that some of the headlines are all over the place. We need to reopen. We know there's still incidents happening. We know there's going to be regional outbreaks, but we also know that we've got to move forward. And then the questions about it: have we gone too soon? What are we doing? Of course, at the same time as this, we also just had announcements as recently as yesterday, and colleagues that are on this call, we were all in a chat session over the last couple of days saying it's hard to put together a presentation because, quite frankly, things are moving so quickly and change on the hour. We don't even know what's being announced for today, in particular for our own province here. But having said that, we're trying to stimulate both a crisis economically, crisis socially, a crisis environmentally that we could talk about in another way, because maybe it's also an opportunity as pollution diminishes, as cities shut down and breath happens between space. But it's also around the whole notion of how do we go about doing this. So in our province yesterday, a stimulus package was announced on top of a capital stimulus announcement that happened a few weeks ago. And at the same time, we've got South businesses that are saying we're hopefully optimistic that we're going to do. But now what? Here we are in the midst of this. We're rethinking our space, we're rethinking our procedures, and we're rethinking safety. And in fact, that's the headline of even how we're going to go about elections coming in the fall, of which we have here locally, one in our local municipalities, and then provincial level, and then of course neighbors, folks that are tuned in from the United States. We know you've got a big one coming up in fall. How do you do these things? How does life go on while this is going on? So there's new things that are being thought about. How do we save small businesses as one? And I'm one of those small businesses, and as one of those small businesses located in Saskatchewan that works all over the place, there's all kinds of questions that we have: apprehension, nervousness, gratitude on the one hand for the programs that are out there, but also wondering of what the future holds in terms of how we're going to go about doing what we do. No matter whether you're consultants or a retail business or somebody in the tourism, the impacts may be better in some cases, less in the others, and almost to nothing in the other case. At the bottom of this text, and I don't know how well you can see it, but 2 in 5 independent businesses in Canada are worried about permanent closures. Some would say this might be a success in itself, saying that we're proven that through other health emergencies and otherwise. But nonetheless, this is where we're at right now. But what were we doing in terms of planning and design moving forward? Again, I got more questions than I do answers. So for those that have answers, this is for all of us to work on this together. So we're looking at how do you take advantage of what's going on out there in terms of that. So you can see a slide that I'm showing here from Tampa, closing streets to open outdoor space to restaurants. And when this is a quote from Jeff Mann, who's got a book, of course, coming out around this very topic. We have to return to this kind of medieval spatial response to disease control. So all of a sudden, public health comes right back into the level of our policy making, including right when the pandemic hit, policy kicked in and we were all told stay at home or. And now we're just starting to loosen up, but again, policy is in place. So when we talk about something that's totally fascinating between that, how can we use our built environment as a way to control the spread of epidemics? So I have more questions in this next session in this. Will streets need to be redesigned? And we're looking at this. There are interactive maps right now. Planners can go online with streetscapes and sidewalk labs. And for those that are on there, and the links will be in this PowerPoint, that show that a lot of towns, cities, and communities don't even have walkways that allow for 2 passerbys. let alone an ordinary crowd. So all of a sudden we're having to rethink about what does that mean going forward. We have to think about how we line and what we line our public space with and how we utilize them. So I know our colleague from Regina will have lots to say on that. We've got to think about green space and what will green space need in terms of new designs, uses, and practices. You know, there are families right now that wish they could go out there and have a game of pickup soccer, but when you have a limit of 5 or 10 within your own various jurisdiction in terms of amassing, it becomes a lot harder to do, particularly when you have Waldo saying, keep 2 meters away from me. So Stanley Park, for instance, has created a new matriarch in terms of how a new hierarchy, I should say. Well, maybe there is a matriarch in there too, but in terms of open to car traffic, open to local traffic, timing, phasing, sequencing. So the whole notion of how we look at park space becomes very, very, very different. Let's think about it, everybody. Our national park systems are closed down right now. That in itself is the most compelling thing, where you would think that some of the most wide open spaces, whether it's Yellowstone Park or whether you're looking at where I'm nearby by Waskesiu in the Prince Albert National Park, that there's a blockade across it and you're not allowed to enter. What will happen to micro-mobility and mobility sharing? This becomes a really interesting thing. Will it become more so, or will it be not? We know that Uber's laying off folks as we go, and we know that there's also people that are wondering what's going to happen to public transit. We've learned through this that it's an essential service, public transit, but at the same time we're saying that Greyhound announced across Canada that they are shutting completely down. When we look at the whole notion of what will we need to be thinking about next? What will those impacts on public transit and other types of public throughputs be? Here's a picture that I picked up, and this goes all the way back to February 10 out of China, a disinfectant tunnel. Now, we have to start thinking about how we go about utilizing protocols in places of our public amenities. So when we look at what is the future of large public spaces, there's a slide of a Saskatchewan Rush, which is a lacrosse stream. So how Canadian of us, it's the largest cheering fans section in Sask Place, which is located in Saskatoon, as I shared earlier. You can see us all sitting close. There's some empty seats at this point because I think they just won and some have vacated. But here's our national sport in our little province, and I say the national sport of the Canadian Football League. That's our equivalent of the National Football League in the States. But the Rough Riders, we bleed green here, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of people already longing for the Rough Riders to open. Can we find a way? Well, they're starting to find ways in other places, but I'm going to get there in a second. Oops, here we go. German Soccer League is reopening in May, but there's going to be no audience. Korea is already open with their ball teams. And again, those are not real folks. That's just made to seem like real folks. But there are also protocols that are being worked on. Are there ways that we can have a season open? And right now, even the province of British Columbia in Canada has offered themselves up to be host to the finishing of the NHL. And the opinions on that range all over the place, from players and otherwise. When we look at the future and how we reimagine public space, sometimes they come in really handy during pandemics. This is from the Javits Center in New York City. I was there for the planning convention held there. There were 7,000 of us in the Winspear Center on the bottom level, while on the top there was a fashion conference going on with another 7,000. It was retrofitted to be a hospital for over 1,000 patients during this. It just shut down in the last 2 days, having what they hope as being over the curve. But it came in real handy during this. And then we can think to each of our own communities in terms of what we've used in terms of the repurposing of large-scale operations in the times of pandemics and other events that happen. So before and after, the questions that come from this are, what will we observe fewer people in the public? It's a good question, I think. If we take a look at the slide of tourism, thing where you have many, many people that are there on the steps, and then you take a look at it now. Will we change what we do in the public? Will we observe changes in the use and regulation of interior public spaces? I'll give an example of a story. I was in a Safeway store in Prince Albert just a week ago. It had arrows on the floor and everything else. After May 4th, the arrows were taken off and the signage was put up to say, it's on you to make sure that you're keeping distance, even if we've taken the arrows to go one way off the lanes. So you can see there's no one size fits all. It's every community's finding their way and trying to find their new balance. So that regulation is something that we have to think about at a local level. And will our perceptions in and of itself change in terms of the public space? And then we have to look at the very serious issue of social value and equity. How will the needs of vulnerable groups such as women, the homeless, low-income residents, the elderly, Indigenous communities, racial minorities, newcomers be accounted for in the future public space designs, practices, and rules? This is critical when we think about some of where the biggest outbreaks are. They're within seniors' homes. They're within density developments where there's crowded conditions, and they're going into our First Nation communities. And as somebody said during the Canadian Urban Institute series of webinars, just a shout out to Mary and the whole team there and the presenters there, is that what they're saying, it's like a guided missile or a particle accelerator that amplifies the very conditions that we had problematic before and then puts them out there at rapid speed to amplify what the gaps and the inequities are. So this might be our very wake-up call to say, maybe now it's time to take care of this. So what will our future look like? Our future homes, and these again, all of the resources for the, I'm begging, stealing, and borrowing from many colleagues for this presentation. These are not my thoughts alone. They're the thoughts of many folks. This is from Tara. And we're looking at future homes purpose-built. We wanted to see the shift towards people knowing that they could have, but this showed us that we could do it. Developers are going to have to rethink development models, looking at how they incorporate commercial spaces, walkability and such. And when we go into rural areas, how do we flip-flop that? And how do we maybe start to see what the rural areas are doing? And a slide I think that may have been missed above, though, is just that there's many, many people that are seeing over 70% of Americans, and there's a similar stat for Canada, that are saying they're questioning whether they want to still retain living in an urban environment. When we talk about planning applications, no longer will it be that we have to give green space, but we're going to really be thinking much like they did in pandemic times and crisis times in New York City, when the whole Central Park was designed. It was designed with such to be the lungs of the city so you could get out there and breathe. I'm sure they're really grateful for that today as well. And new communities putting in strong placemaking, and might I also say placekeeping principles to honor our Indigenous territories and otherwise in this as we go across, and thinking about those local infrastructure and just how important local is. In my last slide, I leave it with this. When this pandemic is finally over, there'll be appreciation for what we have. There'll be new perspectives, socially, environmentally, and spatially, politically, economically, and spiritually. And we'll probably be looking at a whole bunch of things that we took for granted, including visiting friends in the coffee shop, heading out to a concert, and cheering on your local sports team. This quote I adapted from a colleague of mine who I'll send the link to as well. The shot is of a place near where I grew up that I'll be at on Saturday to spend time with my mom, my only pod that I'm involved with other than being in quarantine at a home office. And that's a shot looking out at Redberry Lake. So I leave you with that, and thank you so much, Verona, and the rest of the SEDA team for having me on this.
Thanks, Lenore. I want to invite you back. I want to invite you back on at the end of the session today, and I'll have Logan load Judith's presentation right now. Just a comment on Lenore's presentation. It's, to me, the conundrum is the this difference in between municipalities here within the province and how we address the changes. And Lenore, maybe I'll get you just to mute your video as well. Thank you. How are all the municipalities if we don't do it in tandem, the confusion it causes for the residents and visitors that are moving in between communities is something that will occur. So in terms of our next presenter, Judith Verisek, it's my pleasure to introduce Judith. She's the Executive Director of the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District, where she is actively engaged in designing and implementing programs to support her businesses and provide a safe and friendly destination for residents and visitors. Judith also sits on the board of directors for the International Downtown Association and also chairs the Canadian Committee for the Association, which is currently working on programs to support business improvement districts across Canada. Welcome, Judith. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Verona. You can hear me, right? We're good? So, yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending this webinar. I didn't realize the audience, the wide range of audience that would be attending today. So I really do appreciate you guys interested in learning from what we're doing here in Saskatchewan. As Verona mentioned, my name is Judith Verisek, and I'm the Executive Director with the Regina Downtown Business Improvement District. So Lenore, I think she set the stage very nicely for what's been happening here in the province as well as the country. I'm going to take it down to bootstraps, I guess. Being a business improvement district, we worked very closely with our businesses. We talk to them daily, and we're really hearing the stories from those most affected in our downtowns. And we are a very tactical and operational organization. So some of what I'll be talking about is more in line with actual actions. And like Lenore, I'm also learning from colleagues across Canada. So some of the most of the ideas have been co-opted from other places and reformatted and kind of culled to fit the Saskatchewan environment here. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the COVID impact on our public realm, in particular our sidewalks and our streets. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So this is the way it was, kind of like what Lenore was saying. People are out and about, walking on our sidewalks, walking two abreast in close proximity, not really worried about getting droplets on other people or speaking moistly. So, you know, that's just what it was. And, you know, we have a plaza here in our downtown. We used to gather over 2,000 people to watch movies outdoors. People gathered to socialize and experience events. And now crowds like this are kind of scary for folks. At one time, this attendance, that was our goal for every week during the summer. And maybe not so much anymore. Our plaza also was home for commerce, farmers markets, food trucks. They are located here because it was easy access. We have 35,000 folks that work in our downtown that would come out and make their purchases, enjoy the food trucks, enjoy music. So that activation really added to the vibrancy of our downtown. And then traffic, of course, how can we forget traffic? Back in the day, our buses were running at full capacity, full schedule. They were full of people. We had people out and about. Drop-off, people dropping off while they were in the bus lane. So obviously occurring illegally. It was wonderful just seeing folks out walking around. We have cars parked in the distance there. So the street really served many purposes, the street and the sidewalk. So then COVID-19 hit and pretty much everything changed on a dime. March 16th came and went, and all of a sudden everyone was heading home with boxes full of computers and work files, and that's where they are up until today. According to a Chorus COVID-19 Canadian Consumer Impact Survey, 57% of the respondents to that survey don't know when things are going to be back to normal. 22% think it's going to be back to normal-ish in July, and 14% optimistic think it's going to happen in June. Shopping for food and exercising are the most common activities people are leaving their house to do. More people are picking up and ordering in food. 42% of the respondents to this survey have picked up food from a restaurant since social distancing started. And with the pleasant weather here, and with businesses reopening in the coming days and weeks, folks will eventually return to work. We're going to see more people out and about more often. Maybe not in the numbers that we saw pre-COVID, but definitely more than what we saw in March and April. But the COVID game changer here is the recommendation of physical distancing of 2 meters. So how does the physical distancing affect our public realm like our curbsides? As we all know, the curbsides serve multiple functions. They facilitate movement, they provide access for businesses, they provide access for people, they provide parking, they provide space for activation, but they are a limited resource. Just like land, we're not making any more. So going back to this, you can see here the many functions of the curb. We have buses, transit stops, drop-offs, vehicular movement, parking, pedestrians, alley access. And they all need to safely coexist in a limited amount of space. Now they have to do that while accommodating physical distancing requirements as well. So with the advent of COVID-19, we're starting to see a reprioritization of what's important along the curbside. Right now, many transit systems are operating on limited schedules, if they're operating at all. Due to work at home orders, there's less cars on our street, and in certain areas, less parking for business purposes, less people using buses to get to work or school. Business restrictions have reduced deliveries to our shops and restaurants by the big trucks, but you're seeing more car pickups and folks coming in Uber Eats vehicles to accommodate the deliveries. Those deliveries have increased, which require a different kind of parking. And then, you know, this 2 meters between each person, that makes walking on a 6-foot or a 2-meter sidewalk extremely difficult if you're trying to maintain that space. So how do we adapt our curbside to work within the new normal? And how can we achieve this cost effectively? Because we all know our towns, municipalities, and businesses may not have funding or will not have funding for infrastructure improvements or investments in the coming years. I think they're going to be strapped to keep the lights on. We can use tactical urbanism techniques to quickly adapt to the new normal. So tactical urbanism are short-term or temporary interventions that allow the community to quote unquote test improvements to our urban environment. The intent is to be action-oriented in the short term, but make enough of an impact that can lead to desired long-term changes. So the state of emergency here in the province has forced, like you, many of our restaurants to rely on delivery or pickup for revenue streams. Installing temporary signage that identifies where customers can wait for curbside delivery or where skip the dishes delivery vehicles should wait is key to ensuring that traffic continues to move efficiently. And in doing this, we remove another barrier for restaurants who are all struggling these days. This is one way we can make it easier for them to conduct business while restrictions on in-restaurant dining are in place. Today in Toronto, they announced a new program where they're expediting temporary parking pickup zones for grocery stores, pharmacies, restaurants, and bars that have or are currently transitioning to pickup, takeout, and delivery services. Businesses may qualify for a temporary 10-minute priority parking pickup zone for food, medicine, and pickup close to their business. This is another intervention that provides folks with a place to wait for their pickup order, or perhaps waiting to get into a shop where there are customer limits within. In this picture, this restaurant, I don't know if you can see Mouse, but Cafe Crepe over here has a pickup window. And in the summer, people wait for their order in this little parklet. Obviously, this picture is pre-COVID. As you can tell, people are sitting very close together. But once you apply physical distancing stickers along the bench area, indicating where people could sit and wait, this gets people off of the sidewalks, which allows for pedestrian movement that's unhindered and allows for physical distancing while allowing the business to maintain operations. The distancing capacity restrictions on restaurants will be a huge challenge. If your business plan was based on operating with 30 tables, but now you can only have 15 tables in the same space, you're going to have issues with cash flow. One way that we can temporarily address this is through patios. Expanding patios into curb lanes can help the restaurant get back up to capacity and hopefully make some revenue that will tide them over until we can get to what a new normal would be. While we're here in Saskatchewan, we understand that a year-round outdoor patio is a challenge, given it gets to -30 around here. But the patio season could potentially be expanded into October and November by adding heaters, and perhaps even started earlier in the spring by doing the same. The previous slide, kind of showed a temporary extension into patio. You can see a curb here that's present. This photo depicts, I guess, a more permanent patio where they've used paver stones to maintain the curb line and extend it out into the travel lane. And we've already done this here in Regina. The Copper Kettle, a local restaurant, been around for over 50 years, was one of the first to adopt tactical urbanism before it was a thing. They expanded their patio into the street every year for many, many years, utilizing temporary decking, which you can see in this photo here, to accommodate both patio space and pedestrian traffic. And just recently, several years ago, the folks at the Copper Kettle made that patio and the curb extension permanent, where they moved the curb line out into the street, removed the parking lane, and now they have a larger patio with heaters in that awning photo. And the sidewalk is permanent rather than decking. And then in cities with high density and critical mass of restaurants on certain streets, like in New York and in Toronto, they're considering closing entire streets to allow for these expanded patios and give their restaurants a chance to thrive and to continue to do business. For all you folks that work for municipalities, I would suggest that if a municipality typically charges patio permit fees based on square footage, perhaps that fee can be forgiven this year and allow the restaurant to expand its patio as large as possible while remaining safe and allowing for emergency access. And because the warm weather here in Saskatchewan is finally upon us, decisions for these temporary solutions need to be made quickly and communicated to businesses. If we study these interventions to death, we will lose the short summer season that we have here. Policies and directions need to be provided before phase 3, which is when the restaurants are set to open. Let's make that decision, let's monitor it, and let's adjust it on the fly. To quote the WHO, it's speed, not perfection. So what else can you use travel lanes for? You can set up seating areas, temporary planters, movable chairs, make this a low-cost intervention that adds vibrancy to street life while allowing folks to observe physical distancing. This photo is of Yonge Street, one of the busiest streets in Canada, and if you can do this type of intervention on Yonge, you can pretty much find a way to do it anywhere. Using the parking lane to extend sidewalks will help accommodate physical distancing. This is a photo of Hamilton Street here in Regina. The sidewalk here is actually one of the wider ones in downtown Regina. It's about 8 to 10 feet wide. I haven't been going into work, so I didn't get a chance to measure it. So, but it looks wide enough, right, to accommodate social distancing. But when you look at it again with people, it's still pretty wide, but we start to see other other furniture, if you will, in the photo, which creates pinch points. Things like signage, you can see an A-frame sign there. There's the bike that's chained up to the pole. We have parking meters, lamp posts. They create pinch points, which require pedestrians to take their turn to pass one another while staying 2 meters apart. So what can we do to help alleviate? Well, I don't think this is the prettiest intervention, but it gets the point across. You can extend your sidewalk at low cost. Most communities have a stockpile of these bright orange bike barricades and pylons. I know Regina has a ton of pylons. We see them every year during construction season. So you can do this for next to nothing, and you can test it. Pretty much signage would be your only cost in doing this type of intervention, to extend the sidewalk, to allow for cyclists, to allow for folks with strollers and people walking their dogs to coexist while maintaining some social distance. In this picture, the sidewalk extension is a little prettier, maybe a little bit more cost. You can see the planters and the vegetation in the planters. But converting parking or travel lane on the street using flex posts and planters just expands out the width of your sidewalk to allow for appropriate physical pedestrians. You can also use a lane like this to accommodate cyclists. And what's great about this is that you can measure success through traffic and pedestrian counts. And if it isn't achieving your goals, you simply remove the collective post and the planter and turn it back to the travel lane. The previous photo showed expansion of the sidewalk to accommodate movement. And in this example, the City of Toronto is implementing what they're calling curb lane pedestrian zones for essential businesses and community agencies that require folks to line up on the sidewalk in order to achieve physical distancing. So you can see the lineup designated there alongside the building front. In this example, the curb lane pedestrian zone will provide customers and other pedestrians with enough space to both line up and pass by safely. In New Zealand, the federal government there announced funding for accessible urbanism projects like these that help support changes to the physical environment post-COVID. Things like cycling lanes and sidewalks. And this type of program is currently being discussed with federal government here in Canada, and hopefully there will be programs set up to help maybe implement these types of interventions. So going back to our plaza, how are we going to adapt our parks and plaza post-COVID? So like going back to what Lenore said, things change here on a dime, and we had hoped to do some of our programs in our park and plaza, given that it is an outdoor space. It's pretty open. Like the earlier photo, this is what movie night looks like in downtown Regina. But with the provincial government regulations limiting gatherings to less than 10, 15, or 30 people, we made the difficult decision to cancel our 2020 Cinema Under the Stars and concert series. And while it was a difficult decision, it was the right. However, we still have potential to host some smaller scale programming like yoga in the park. If our municipal parks are able to look at a more prescriptive layout for yoga, where we would pre-measure out distancing and indicate exactly where to play their yoga mat. We would be able to do that with our spoken word series. Again, pre-placement of chairs that have and things like Zumba. Also, we can prescribe what the diseases are. And I know. One big challenge with the operation of farmers market, if and when they are allowed to operate, is space. I know right now the Regina Farmers Market is government be able to designate it as a service and be allowed to open sooner than phase one. There is an line right now. places like BC and Alberta have already picked up their farmers market, and here in Minnesota, the market tends to a lot more out, have signage that are promoting shopping, not shopping, that whole vibrancy that get the local farmer and it may not happen, but what we see is that you shift I'll schedule pick up. I
Judith, I just want to interrupt Judith. I was just, the bandwidth seems to be really scarce here. Maybe if you shut off your video, it might be,
okay.
just we could try that.
Is that better?
Let's give
Okay,
that a try.
Okay. So here we are, because we're a business improvement district, we also run a clean team. So in terms of COVID, we've had to change our practices as well, from going from just picking up litter and removing graffiti to actually going out and disinfecting high touch areas in the public realm. We're going to start disinfecting crosswalk buttons, benches in our parks and Main Street. We're going to look at cleaning up transit shelters a little bit more often and wiping down exterior door handles. As we all know, public safety should be the first priority for everything that we do here, and our clean team is going to be out there helping with that. So to wrap things up, we have a long road ahead of us. COVID-19, as Lenore said as well, has made us really rethink our built environment. And there are so many things we have to consider, and so many things have ripple effects. Some of these opportunities to try something new, try something temporary, will allow us to see if it sticks. And we have to keep our businesses top of mind and do our best to implement policy that removes barriers for them to operate. We want there to be something to come back to at the end of this pandemic. So again, speed, not perfection. If we ever want to get back to this, first we need a vaccine, but we also need creative decisions to be made quickly and without fear of failure. A willingness to try something new, a willingness to set aside old beliefs. If we can do all that, maybe our businesses will survive and thrive post-COVID while supporting all of our public health efforts. Maybe we'll discover new and more efficient ways of doing things, and maybe we'll have a public realm that works better for everyone. Thanks, and happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Judith. I'll invite you back after Todd's presentation. While we're putting up Todd's presentation, though, a question. City of Regina, are they stepping up and changing regulations or getting ready to adopt some of the suggestions that your bid might be making?
We're in conversations with them right now. Again, not perfection. I know that there's interest in doing that, doing some of the ideas that we've presented. We just need to make sure we can do it safely, make sure that there's still access for fire lanes and emergency service vehicles. But there definitely is appetite to step out from, I guess, the old box and into the new box.
Great. And well, and I'm looking forward to, as I introduce Todd, it seems to me that SPRA and organizations like yourself, the bid, it seems like there's a mutual fit there to work together in terms of moving ahead so folks have more of an active and social quality of life. So it's my pleasure to introduce Todd Schaefer. Todd is entering his third year as the CEO of Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association, the network of recreation leaders in the province dedicated to energizing Saskatchewan and supporting the framework for recreation that is being adopted across Canada. Todd has over 20 years of nonprofit and municipal leadership and brings experience from both rural and urban centers here in Saskatchewan and as well as the Northwest Territories. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks, Verona. Can everybody hear me? Good.
You seem to be very clear.
All right, excellent. I will maybe just keep my video off in order to try to have an impact on that bandwidth as well. Thanks so much, Verona and SEDA, for putting on this this webinar. I think the conversations that both Judith and Lenore have presented so far have been fantastic, and similar to what you just described, there's lots of synergies between what they spoke about and what I'm going to talk about here today as well. Let's see if I can make this work. There we go. So as Verona mentioned as well, SPRA is the association leader for parks and recreation industry in this province. Our activities support recreation's impact on the quality of life for people in Saskatchewan. And one of our primary roles is to manage the recreation section of the Saskatchewan Lotteries Trust Fund for Sport, Culture and Recreation. We have offices both here in Regina as our primary office, as well as offices in Dinsmore, Wynyard, Birch Hills, Kyle, La Ronge, Yorkton and Saskatoon, spread throughout the province. One of the things that I want to highlight here as well is that is things that we're not. So often, partially based on our name, I think we get confused with provincial government, and we are not provincial government. Although we work closely with the provincial government and the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport, we are actually a nonprofit organization. And we do get regular calls for people to book campsites at provincial parks, which as much as we'd like to help you in that scenario, we cannot book your campsites, but we can point you in the right direction as to where you can find those. For my presentation today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the important role of the parks and recreation industry. We're going to talk about the current realities and the future look and considerations, following a similar format to what my predecessors have done here. So to start with, what is recreation and why is it important? So recreation contributes to a high quality of life by creating active, connected, vibrant individuals and communities. Recreation also contributes to Saskatchewan's economy by building strong communities and families, enhancing mental, physical, and social well-being, connecting people to nature, and contributing to job creation and tourism. At the outset, recreation is a public good, and recreation and leisure have been proven to support individual and community resilience, which I believe is the theme of this entire webinar series. So the recreation and parks industry is made up of professionals and volunteers delivering support, programming, facilities, and educational opportunities. The industry provides a foundation of infrastructure, both from a physical standpoint, like facilities and green and open spaces, and a human perspective from volunteers and programs and events. They all contribute to community connection, jobs, tourism, and that social contribution that we're currently missing in this environment. It provides employment training and skills development for careers in community development, community programs and events, and facility and park operations. The physical and human infrastructure provided by the recreation industry play a key role in enabling the success of major tourism, sporting, and cultural events in communities throughout the province. And lots of examples in what Judith described as well, with pictures of the park in downtown Regina here. And just to highlight, you'll notice in the photo on the side, reference to the reopening of the economy in Saskatchewan and the plan by our provincial government. Some questions as to why fishing and camping may have been included in that opening phase. And the numbers here from 2010 and 2012 show the impact, although it's a little bit older as far as the data goes, significant numbers, 8.3 billion with respect to recreational fishing, and 14.5 billion the Canadians spend on nature-based recreational activities. So parks and recreation in the new normal. These signs you've seen popping up all over the province lately in that effort to support public health regulations and keep community members safe and protected. But I don't actually believe that this is going to be the new normal. I think there's a transition that goes through there. And to further illustrate that, I'll talk more about what these states are from a recreation perspective through the lenses of recreation programs and services, recreation facilities, and those parks and open spaces. Impacts on program and service delivery. Photos like this one aren't going to be seen as often for a while, but you may see something similar through Zoom pictures that have people sitting on their bikes in their living rooms or out in their yards. We are finding through this current environment that community connections do play a vital role in our economy, our health, and our happiness. And the people who work within this recreation industry are committed to community well-being, and those things haven't changed, and they're finding ways to be able to create solutions that are going to help with that community connection. Like the rest of the world, recreation industry is searching for creative opportunities to impact well-being, testing new methods, new programs, new ways of bringing people together while keeping them safely apart. We are seeing, as you can see in the pictures, we've got fitness classes that are being offered online. We've got some groups that are developing activity kits and delivering them electronically where that can work, where folks have access to those online platforms. And then where families don't have access to technology, they've been dropping off those cleaned and disinfected activity kits on people's doorsteps and moving them from place to place. They're using sidewalks and windows as ways of continuing to share messages, and more social media pages popping up within communities that share information among those community members, everything from online workouts to motivational messages and engaging discussion topics such as planting tips for gardens, sharing recipes, activities for kids, and much, much more. Also during this current time, offering programs and hosting large events, as Judith mentioned in the Regina downtown district, are just not possible. And with that goes a critical source of revenue, putting communities and recreational organizations in a very precarious financial position. And even with the opening of easing of restrictions on gatherings, this is continuing to be a serious concern that will have financial implications for communities and the provincial economy going forward. There is referenced gathering size increases up to 30 within the current plan, which is not enough critical mass to bring in the revenues. I appreciate the ideas and the thoughts that Judith shared related to expanding spaces, and I think when we look at incorporating numbers of staff as well as volunteer supports that are needed within some of these gathering spaces, the participant numbers are going to continue to lower, which is going to be a challenge. From an online program and service delivery perspective, it appears that the default action of choice, given current restrictions, is to do online. And therefore, that creates additional challenges related to access and inclusion. As was referenced by Lenore earlier, the realities in the North, not only from a COVID outbreak perspective, but also from an internet and technology perspective and access to these types of services is certainly a challenge that we're seeing within the recreation industry. And we have to be careful not to lean too heavily on that online delivery in order to make sure that we're continuing to be inclusive of the entire population. From a future look perspective related to programs, addressing individual fears and desires. As we look forward, we're going to be faced with the realities that some people may be afraid to gather in groups or even leaving their homes or yards, while others are going to be ready to rush to participate as soon as the province eases restrictions. People will interpret any vague messaging in ways that suit them and support their personal fears or desires. We're also going to have to deal with shrinking budgets. Both municipal and nonprofit organization budgets are going to be under a lot of stress, meaning that the difficult conversations are going to be ahead. Recreation service delivery historically has been seen as secondary when it comes to prioritization of spending. However, we know and have seen over the past 6 weeks that programs and services delivered through the recreation industry are critical to the economy, to the physical and mental health of individuals, and to their communities. We know that many people are going to need and demand that recreation program and service delivery return to normal as quickly as possible, but some of the costs associated with accessing these services are going to increase unless additional funds are redirected from elsewhere to address those needs. We're going to see event delivery model changes. Programs and events will be challenged by physical distancing and gathering restrictions. We may see a combination of both in-person and online components that could provide a more enriching experience for attendees and possibly be less expensive. However, how we offer services to people who don't have access to the online world is going to continue to be a challenge, and we're going to need to find ways to ensure that they're engaged in this recreation opportunity as well. And then this has come up in both of Lenore and Judith's presentations. The increase in that localization or finding those local creative solutions is already taking place, and we need to embrace it. From a policy perspective, for all the elements of recreation that I'm talking about, whether they be programs, facilities, or parks, as well as ideas referenced by Judith and Lenore, provincially there's going to be a need to outline clearly what the criteria are that allow for creativity in local decision making. Essentially giving communities the framework that they're able to work within and make decisions that are going to end up being best for their residents, and then being able to monitor any adherence to that as we move forward. The impacts on public recreation facilities. This is the space where we're getting the greatest number of questions and inquiries right now. Recreation facilities have the ability to play a role in helping address some of the challenges that we're facing, and how we integrate the reopening of facilities in a safe manner that supports both the communities and residents is going to be critical. As you can see within the photos here, emergency supports. Many of you probably know that the rec industry has been called upon to assist during public emergencies of any kind. Employees in the recreation industry are often deployed to provide emergency support because they're located in communities across the province and are trained in the delivery of programs and services. And they're also very familiar with the community's public recreation facilities, which are accessed in those public emergency situations. Some areas are being used as testing facilities right now, and industry staff being reassigned to assist in that process. We're seeing lots of pictures related to please stay off. Anywhere that the public gathers for leisure activities has either been closed or people have been asked not to use those spaces. The shifting landscape is seeing some recreation staff redeployed into more of an enforcement role versus a programming one in order to maintain that public safety. And then the Reopen Saskatchewan plan, although we're seeing some positive developments early, and there is some evidence showing that most of Saskatchewan is succeeding at flattening the curve. The provincial government has announced that 5-phase approach to recovery, with phase 1 as was mentioned earlier, already beginning this week. But we're not out of the woods yet, and certainly as is the case in northern Saskatchewan, but we are getting a glimpse of what a changing future could start to look like as early as this week. So the hammer and the dance. This is an article that was written by Thomas Pueo, and it talks about being prepared for that series of relaxing and then tightening restrictions. We need to be prepared for a second, third, or maybe even a fourth wave of this. It will be important that we look to other countries for approaches and lessons learned, and that we're all prepared for the dance of moving in and out of restrictions over the next little while. And I think that's going to be the case for every industry within this province. Communication is the key. And I would even add that honesty is the king. People need to know what's happening now and what's permitted and what isn't. Over here at SPRA, We're currently surveying our membership for feedback on the Reopen Saskatchewan strategy and using that information to inform recommendations and thoughts on the next phases of that strategy to our government. Whatever the actions that are taken, it's critical that every industry work together to build trust with the public by communicating often and authentically about the actions that we're taking and what our limitations are with respect to that. From a risk mitigation standpoint, the reality is that new normal will be about risk mitigation versus risk elimination. From a recreation facilities perspective, we'll need to not only enable the public to be safe, we'll need to help them feel safe. There's going to be a need, and it's already started, for enhanced policies and procedures. Facilities are critical community gathering places that enable community connectedness. It's essential that we're able to access these facilities. We can continue to maintain them now, or in order for us to be able to access these facilities in the future, we have to continue to put efforts into maintaining them and keeping them in shape to be able to access when the go-ahead is provided. We need to explore adaptations for them to be safer, similar to the approaches that are shared related to the business community. There's going to be increased attention to cleaning and disinfecting on a regular basis, and some of this is already being planned by some communities, including increasing the need and demand for commercial quality equipment and products to offer a higher level of cleanliness in those spaces. And then increased pressure on facility operators to communicate how they've improved to meet the public demand for those safer experiences. And then, of course, as mentioned already, there is cost implications to all of these changes. So additional policies, procedures, enforcement does not come without a price tag, which could mean reductions in the level of service that's been provided. Communicating that is going to be extremely important on what the level of service is that we're going to be able to provide moving forward, and position facility operators with the tools to face those increased challenges related to unmet expectations. Now to touch on parks and open spaces. The importance of these areas right now are local parks, trails, and open spaces have seen greater connection and interest than ever before. They've always served as places where people can find peace and connection with nature, and now we need them more than ever. There's ample research that supports positive impact of the environment on diseases and health, including mental health. Some research has initially focused on cognitive and attentional benefits of natural experiences. Patterns have emerged which suggest that living in a place with more nature produces more mental benefits and is likely to positively impact cognitive functioning and attentional capacity. It's a paradox unlike we've ever dealt with before. Parks and open spaces are being lauded for their mental and physical health benefits, while at the same time are being scrutinized for whether or not the public can use them safely. Our provincial parks here in Saskatchewan are set to open on June 1st. Regional parks, which are self-governed, are recommended to follow those same processes. However, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and many have very limited capacity. People do currently have access to their neighborhood and community parks, and some communities are finding ways to provide reminders for those physical distancing parameters in order to keep people with the opportunity to enjoy them together. Community gardens in Saskatchewan have been identified as being permitted with physical distancing in place. However, similar to the parks comment, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. These are community-based decisions depending on the realities that exist within that community. And then we're also seeing more and more stories in the media about authorities and public clashing over access to and use of park spaces and open spaces. Some provinces have started to initiate issuing tickets and fines to those not following the regulations within park space. We haven't gotten to that stage in Saskatchewan, and I hope that we never get to that stage. As mentioned, renewed appreciation for those parks and open spaces. There's tremendous interest in access to those community outdoor spaces right now. And with that comes the need for more space, similar to what Judith mentioned, trying to find opportunities to create outdoor spaces. Within the recreation industry, this is about walking, biking. As we look at taking some time to crystal ball ideas and where we can find this, maybe some of the places don't go back to the way that they were. Some roads may be pedestrian only or lanes dedicated for cycling. As mentioned by Judith as well, the idea of patios or even outdoor restaurants moved into park spaces, sidewalks getting widened, parking lots getting repurposed for other activities and other events. Our activities in our parks need to be prepared for more visits. Because absence makes the heart grow fonder, we're going to have to prepare our parks and open spaces for a potential onslaught of visitations once full-scale recovery is in place. Many local parks and sensitive habitat areas have limited carrying capacity, the point at which a piece of land can sustain its own biodiversity. Overcrowding of parks may become a significant issue in the future, affecting wildlife habitats and the quality of those trails and experiences for visitors. And then, of course, the idea and concept of adhering to the rules. Social distancing in parks, use of playground equipment, open soccer pitches and baseball fields. All of these beautiful spaces are teasing us right now with the leaves starting to come out and the green starting to appear in the grass. It brings forward significant philosophical questions related to enforcement. Will communities choose to set up an enforcement policy or make requests for their residents to take greater personal responsibility for these spaces? There are many debates on approach and more that will be coming soon. Continuing crystal balling look, virtual reality and tourism. I like to think of this idea as the Saskatchewan Wanderer 2.0. So using virtual reality to allow people to plan future trips to our local parks and to the many wonderful secret locations of adventure throughout this province. The concept of a gardening boom is certainly in the forefront. Typically seen as recreational, gardening makes a shift to become more essential from a food security perspective. This has been the reality in some of the rural centers in this province and is making its way into the urban centers more and more. More community gardens may need to be built, which would adhere to physical distancing recommendations, of course, and then give all people access to land and opportunity to grow their own food. And then I think we're also going to see a resurgence of self-reliance. This forced by a lack of resources and access to some of the retail opportunities, many people are going to be trying their hand more and more at repairing their own belongings rather than buying replacements, building their own structures rather than paying someone else to do it for them, taking care of spaces that they may not have had time to take care of in the past. And then with respect to time and leisure time, that idea of unstructured play. Parents are using the outdoors right now and free play opportunities to help them raise their own children. A whole generation of structured kids now gets a chance to experience unstructured play, an opportunity to influence perspectives and connections to the natural world and explore the possibilities that lie in an uninterrupted, unplanned day out in the woods. Final thoughts. Found this quote from Porter and Onescu. It talks about recreation adds to the viability and vitality of communities and also their resiliency by enhancing a sense of self, place, and community. Our parks, open spaces, recreation facilities, programs, services, environments are all critical pieces of the community fabric. We have an opportunity now to ensure that these places and spaces continue to enable community connectedness and remain vibrant and safe. The recreation industry has been contributing to placemaking in public spaces for decades in this province, and we look forward to continuing to evolve in this new normal and working alongside folks like Lenore and Judith and Verona at SEDA as well. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Todd. That was very comprehensive. And we have gone over time, but I just want to pose a couple of questions to the three of you, to Todd, Judith, and Lenore. And a couple of our resilience webinars have focused on self-generating funds in new ways. And I think we should go without video, Lenore, just because the bandwidth is really, it really seems to be low. We have focused on community investment co-ops in terms of a means to raise funds for community activities. Next week, we're going to talk about community foundations, which can be mandated to do a range of activities, including economic development. So between the recreation and the downtown public placemaking and the experience of all three of you, do you see some way of coming together, or where we could be, what we may be missing at a local level or provincial level in terms of bringing limited resources together in a more horizontal fashion to address what we need to address over the next couple of years?
Verona, this is Judith. My take on it is that it is essential and critical that we all build partnerships with like-minded organizations, and be really creative about it. I know from our organization standpoint, we've repivoted our priorities to support our businesses, our membership, get folks in their doors, help offset their costs. But I'm sure there are other organizations out there that could help us do that. And if that's the case, could we work together to amplify the reach, or to I guess get the word out to more people and generate more ROI for our efforts? So definitely looking at those partners, whether it's with other nonprofits, other organizations within the city, whether it's ECDEV or tourism or other associations. I think we all are in maybe not the same boat, but we're definitely in the same storm. So let's all work together to get to where it's clear again.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I would just echo Lenore here, what Judith has said, and thanks to both of you for the presentations as well. I think collaborations is also about trying to reach out to folks that aren't like as well, because I think sometimes that gets missed. So, the private sector has a lot to offer in this, especially local businesses, and I know we're organization, but direct to some of the businesses and that within places, which is happening already, which is great to see. But I think it really amplifies the fact of how important local is in all of this.
Alrighty. If Todd doesn't have a comment, I will pose a question from one of our attendees, Jennifer in Humboldt. She's in questioning, given the increase of online tech during COVID, do you see any aspects of tech impacting future placemaking efforts in rural and urban environments?
So Lenore here, I'll jump in, and Jennifer, great question. I think one of the things that technology has done is it helps to open people up in their living rooms to places they've never gone before. So at the same time that some of us may be feeling trapped in our own spaces and can't wait to get out to go enjoy a park or otherwise, I also think that it opens up the opportunity for technology to welcome us into the local museum in Humboldt or to other amenities that we have across, various different jurisdictions. I think what we're also going to see is technology used for a way for booking in phased ways to go in person, because I think we're going to have to start looking at how we kind of sort out not overwhelming actual places. And so that may be the other way, just like, was shared around dropping in, bookings for groceries and drop-off lanes. I think there's going to be a lot more wearable technology in that. And I think it's also going to be used for surveillance too, apps, temperature, and otherwise.
Lenore, I totally agree with you. This is Judith. And from, I guess, a business standpoint, we've had to work with a few of our businesses that were not necessarily tech savvy, and quickly pivot them to having online presence, and it basically prepare them for e-commerce, because as Todd was talking about, the hammer and the dance, if and when phase wave 2 or 3 hits and we have to close again, we want to make sure our members are in good shape to be able to weather that storm if it comes. We are looking at virtual store tours. Other business improvement districts have done virtual fashion shows. Just locally here, Amy Schoolhauser over at Schoolhouse Cooking, she's doing online cooking classes, and they've been oversubscribed. So it's really interesting to see how businesses have pivoted to adapt to online technology. And I think what we might even see is development of new types of technology to kind of meet the needs of.
Okay, thanks so much, Todd.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think the innovation that's going to be coming forward from a tech perspective, that's going to blend both the needs for people to physically feel closer to each other. There's going to be the opportunities for those kind of small gatherings, and then a blend of what that technology is to reach those that really are enjoying having that space and the screen in between them and others. So I think that's definitely going to have an impact. What we think of as space currently is going to be redefined as a result of the way that tech is able to bring us closer through environments like this.
Well, thank you three for your time and your insights today. As we move forward, I really hope that our organizations and others across the province and the private sector as well, Lenore, again, it's really important to focus on our common client, which is community, and more so now than ever before. So I look forward to working with all of you. Just a reminder, our next webinar in the series will be next Thursday at 1:30 p.m. Saskatchewan time. We're looking at, as mentioned, at the Community Foundation model as an avenue to raise funds for community and economic development. And Karen Mikolenko will discuss how we can fast track that process and get something going within weeks rather than months. So thanks again to all of you. Stay well.
Thank you.